is KVUE's in-depth look at growth happening in Central Texas. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg in Austin today, getting an up-close look at transportation across the city. The secretary discussed Austin's growth challenges, specifically the connection between affordable housing and affordable transit. Bryce Newberry spoke with him one-on-one today, and Bryce joins us in our studio tonight with more on the secretary's visit. Hi, Bryce.
Hi, Kvue. Good evening to you. One of the main focuses at Secretary Pete Buttigieg's DOT is on reconnecting communities split by infrastructure, like the impact of I-35 on East Austin. Plans call for this freeway to get even wider in the years to come, but this is just one local project he's closely watching.
Stepping on to Capital Metro's Red Line train Wednesday, U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg kicked off a two-day visit to the capital city.
I'm deeply impressed by the work that has gone on here.
He rode about 10 minutes on the train, talking with city and community leaders.
Living in Austin used to mean you have to have a car. You have no choice. Investing in transit opens up choices for more and more people.
And here, the choices are growing. 4 major projects in Austin have the attention of the feds right now. A $4 billion expansion at the airport, a $6 billion widening of I-35, a $7 billion new mass transit system known as Project Connect, approved by voters in 2020, and nearly $500 million for active mobility, things like bike lanes and urban trails. Big costs that need big help from the federal government.
We're not only building infrastructure, but we're building it the right way, for the right reasons, for the right people.
The federal infrastructure law will bring billions to Texas to revamp roads, bridges, airports, and more over the next 5 years. Billions more are available to cities and projects as grants.
How can Austin be competitive for some of those grants that are available outside of the state funding?
When we talk about these goals like safety, equity, climate, job creation, those don't have to be an either or. You can do a lot of those things all at once, and when you do, that makes a given idea more competitive for these very limited dollars.
Community criticism continues over the plan to widen the highway that has divided Austin for decades. The infrastructure law includes $1 billion to reconnect communities.
And one thing that's very important to consider if there's a vision or a plan to expand those highways is to do that in a way that benefits more than it creates harm.
While we're still years away from seeing the end of big local transit projects, Secretary Buttigieg says Austinites have a lot to look forward to.
Austin, you have a lot to be proud of, and I know that you are just getting started.
And late today, Secretary Buttigieg spoke at a South by town hall. He'll be in town tomorrow as well, but his schedule is closed to the press. We are told that he'll continue transportation discussions with our local leaders. Kvue.
All right, Bryce Newberry live for us tonight. Bryce, thank you.
So we have so many transportation projects here, as you know.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how can Austin be competitive for some of those grants that are available outside of the state funding?
Well, the part of what we're looking for in these competitive grants are projects and visions that are going to lift whole communities up and do a lot of good things at the same time. That's part of what I'm very impressed with here. When we talk about these goals like safety, equity, climate, job creation, those don't have to be an either or. You can do a lot of those things all at once, and when you do, that makes a given idea more competitive for these very limited dollars. You heard the mayor talk about the vision here on everything from transit to highways to reconnecting communities to the airport. And I'm looking forward to seeing what ideas come into those competitions.
Obviously, you've seen a lot of cities and what they're doing. What would you say Austin is doing right, and what we could maybe do better here?
Well, I think Austin really stands out for the level of community engagement and collaboration that goes on here. That's not easy. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it takes a lot of sweat to make sure everybody's truly been heard and that nobody's being left out. But when you do that on the front end, that can mean that a project is a lot more smooth and ultimately swift as it goes on to get executed. So that's one thing I've been really encouraged and impressed by here and want to continue to follow. I also think Austin has a lot of challenges. That rapid growth, the steep escalation in housing and other costs here, that does create some real difficulties. But I see how the mayor, the community, everybody who's involved in these efforts is being really intentional about taking those challenges head on.
So anything we could be doing better in terms of those projects?
You know, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the projects come in, but I expect they're going to meet a very high bar.
Okay. And when it comes to the infrastructure law and all of the funding for highways, in a state like Texas, how can we still prioritize mass transit, especially here when that's what people want?
Well, we're a very pro-transit administration. There's nothing wrong with investing in highways, especially given the repair and maintenance backlog that we have. I would say one thing that's very important to consider if there's a vision or a plan to expand those highways is to do that in a way that benefits more than it creates harms, because there is a cost. And so we've got to make sure that when more capacity is needed and capacity is added, that there's a plan for how to make sure that any displacement that happens can be minimized or can be managed, and to make sure that there are measures to maybe support transit at the same time, or create lanes that encourage people to be going many in a vehicle at the same time. That can help cut back on congestion and pollution for the long run.
So with the expansion right here with I-35, that's something that's going on. I heard in a recent interview you mentioned, federal dollars were used to split a community. They should also be used to help bring it back together. What do you think that looks like here?
Well, one thing that I was really interested to hear about is a proposal to cap over part of I-35, effectively linking two parts of town that had been divided by that piece of infrastructure. So I look forward to learning more about that local plan. And we're planning to support a number of visions. This could be that kind of vision. In so many communities where this has happened, where you see a highway or a railway or another piece of infrastructure that divides sometimes a low income from a high income area, sometimes even divides a black neighborhood from a white neighborhood. We've got to get away from that and make sure that transportation always connects more than it divides.
Mm-hmm. That's a hundreds of millions dollar project that doesn't have funding right now. I mean, how much federal support do you think would be available for something like that?
Well, one thing that's in the infrastructure law is a dedicated fund for reconnecting communities. So there's $1 billion right there that could be used for projects or visions like that. There are also other resources across some of our highway funding and our competitive grants. Again, especially when you can meet several goals at once. If something is going to benefit climate, safety, and equity at the same time, or if it's going to do an enormous amount of job creation and help a community prepare for needing to be more resilient for extreme weather. Some of those combinations are those that will be most convincing and most competitive in these discretionary grant competitions.
And I know you talked about the transit-oriented housing a bit. I mean, affordability is such an issue here. What does it look like to really have those transit-oriented housing developments and fix or help fix that issue?
Well, part of what we're seeing right here at Saltillo is a lot of transit-oriented development going on. Of course, one of the most important things for housing affordability is just to add more housing stock so that there's not such a mismatch between supply and demand. There are also interventions that can be done with funding, like I think how part of this Project Connect funding might be used locally, to ensure that anybody who is displaced or who finds that their neighborhood is becoming unaffordable gets some kind of support to keep them in their homes and their communities where they belong.
Anything that you want to add?
I just want to add again the extent to which I'm deeply impressed by the work that has gone on here. Not a lot of communities took that bold and difficult decision to vote for more tax revenue to be raised and then to use it on transit that will benefit everybody. Doing that well could make Austin a national model, and it's something I'll be watching closely as I travel around the rest of the country. Could be an example for others to look at.
Thank you. And hopefully that means you'll be back too.
I would love to.
To see more
Any
of the
excuse to get
projects.